Banditos. Welcome to a Friday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah, and we have a great one for you today. It's another independent creator, and this time it's for somebody who is kickstarting a project right at this very moment. His name is Mike Spring. He's from Outtatime Comics, his own outfit, and he is kickstarting for a new story called 8-Bit Slasher. And it's kind of like a horror comedy video game amalgam. And it's really great because he's done a number of different Kickstarters, all successful before. Red, White, and Broke, Confessions of an American Superhero. He's done Uncaped. He's really trying to bring the fun back into comics. And we love talking to him. So let's get to it. This is Mike Spring. His name is Mike Spring. Mike, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Great. Well, we're going to start you off with the same question we ask all our guests, which is how and when did you first discover comics?
Well, so like as a real little kid, I think I occasionally picked some up off like the grocery store spinner rack. If that's not dating me, I don't know what does. But the sort of my comics origin story that I like to share is Transformers #3. I very distinctly remember I was at a flea market with my parents, and there was Transformers #3, which had Spider-Man in the black costume on the cover. And I'd seen Spider-Man cartoons on TV, and I loved Transformers, so I was like, I want to read this. And I got that, and then of course it was Transformers, which was awesome, and then Spider-Man had this costume that was like magically turning into clothes, and I was like, what's that all about? And so went back and got the rest of the 4-issue Transformers miniseries, and that started with, there. And then I got into the G.I. Joe comics, and I started picking up Spider-Man comics because of that, and then pretty much it's been all of the spare money I've had for the rest of my life. I've been a diehard collector ever since. I still go to the comic store every week and drop way too much money. I'm a pretty dyed-in-the-wool comics reader, but that's where it started. It was definitely Transformers #3.
Wow, that's great. Not a lot of our guests know the exact issue. Some
Oh
of
yeah,
them do.
yeah.
Um, I assume you still have that issue.
I do. I mean, it's in really rough shape. It's what we would lovingly call a reader copy now. And I have
Mhm.
gone back and bought a nicer copy since then, just to kind of have one that's more pristine. But I do have it now. Don't ask me where it is. It's in a box somewhere. I'm not so great at organizing my collection, so I have boxes and boxes and boxes of comics that are largely in no order, or some chunks of order. So I could find it if I had to, but it would take me a few hours.
Well, we'll do that another time. That'll be
Yeah.
sort of like a bonus episode.
Right. Right.
Um, so when did you, uh, take this pastime, this passion of, reading comics and getting into these characters and really think about, making your own comics?
Yeah, it's kind of a two-part journey, if you will. I started writing prose books maybe like 10 years ago. And it started when I read a YA book. I like YA books quite a bit. I read a bunch of them, as well as, regular A books, whatever you want to call that. Adult, it sounds funny to say adult books. That's not what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah, sure.
Mature audience.
Grown up
And
books. Yeah,
grown up.
even mature doesn't even work
Sure
anymore,
sounds
right?
bad. Yeah. And it was a popular franchise. I'm not going to say which one because I don't need to burn any bridges, but I will say it's not Twilight, it's not Hunger Games. But it was another one that they made movies out of. And I was reading the first book, and I was like, this is really awful. Like, it's a great story concept, but it is written so bad. It actually made me angry how badly it was written. And I've always had a lot of ideas in my head. And that was the moment where I really said, like, if this person can write this book and have it sell enough copies to make a movie out of, and I presume this person's made, $1 million, I can at least write something that good. Like, I may not be the greatest writer in the world, but I can top this because it was terrible. And so that got me started writing prose books. And I had, toyed with the idea of writing comics, for years, but I always felt like intimidated by it. Like my thought process was like, well, I don't know. I could maybe come up with like a Spider-Man story, but what would I do with Spider-Man for 12 issues? I don't know. And so that kept me from writing comics. And then finally, after I'd been writing prose books for a few years, it kind of dawned on me like, Marvel's not exactly beating my door down to write Spider-Man just yet. Like, maybe I shouldn't worry about that just yet. Maybe I take it one step at a time. Like, when I try writing some other comics first before I worry about what I'm going to do with Spider-Man when Marvel, just comes calling for me. So that kind of was eye-opening for me. And that's when I kind of had the idea for my first comic, Red, White, and Broke. And I said, yeah, I like this idea. Let me run with this. And I wrote that as a 4-issue miniseries, and I really enjoyed it, and I thought that it turned out pretty good. And that's when I was like, yeah, I think I can do this. And so I've been doing it ever since. And that was about 4 years ago when I started Red, White, and Broke. So I've been writing comics ever since, and I've kind of switched fully over to just comics now, and prose just takes too long. So I like writing comics better now.
So before we get into, all that comic goodness, I did want to dive into the, the novel, the prose
Sure.
stuff just a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, one of the things that's on your site that you wrote was I guess it's a novel, right? Bloodsucker Blues, a
Mhm.
Vamps in Vegas story.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me about that and the idea for that, and maybe your thinking behind why that was prose, because like anything else, it could be comics if you had
Sure.
thought about it, if it was just like, sort of a confidence issue, like you were saying, or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, really the thinking behind it was just I have this idea for a story and I'm going to write it, and prose made sense. Again, I didn't know anything about writing a comic necessarily. I didn't have any artist connections, stuff like that. So that seemed like the simplest. The nice thing about prose is you only need you. As a writer, as writing comics, I have to have an artist because I can't draw to save my life. But with prose, I can just do it myself. So I just started getting up early before the rest of my family every morning and writing until I had the first. I actually wrote it as like four kind of novellas. They were about 15,000 words a piece because I was just trying to like see if I could do it. But you put them all together, it makes one nice chunky, decent sized novel. And Yeah, that was really so Vamps in Vegas, or Bloodsucker Blues, a Vamps in Vegas story, because I like to make my titles as long as humanly possible. Is basically a humorous take on vampires. I always, and this comes through in a lot of my comics, I always am fascinated by kind of where fiction and the real world meet, right? There's so many things in fiction that we just sort of take for granted and accept. And I'm always like, yeah, but in the real world, how would that work? And so that was my take on vampires, kind of deconstructing it a little bit. Like, what's it like? What does he do for a job? Like, where does he live? Like, how does he make a living if he can only come out at night? And like, like how does he date people if he wants to suck their blood all the time, and all that kind of stuff. And so I wrote it with a really sarcastic kind of humorous approach, and self-published it, and it got, people really seemed to like it. And I've thought about taking it and turning it into a comic book actually at some point. You know what I mean? Like, it certainly is kind of on my list of things to get to. I've been so busy with the other stuff that I've been writing specifically for comics that I just haven't gotten around to adapting it yet. But I think it would be a fun comic to adapt and do a vampire story. Vampires are always popular, so why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could definitely work. A question about sort of the subtitle, Vamps in Vegas story, sort of leads me to think that this is possibly a series or a serialization.
Yeah.
Is that ever the intention? And is that something you might, revisit in the future?
Yeah, my original intention was to sort of do an ongoing series with it, and I did the novellas originally and kind of wanted to tie them together, and then I thought I can write more of this, but then after that I wrote a different book, and then I kind of got into comics, so it's sort of been a little bit back burnered, but yeah, it is kind of, the idea is that Las Vegas is kind of a haven for vampires because it's a 24/7 city, so people who come out only at night in Las Vegas don't stand out, right? Like if you live in like, I don't know, Tempe, Arizona, right? Like everything closes at like 9 o'clock. What are you gonna do? But in Vegas, everything's open 24 hours. So it made
Right.
sense to me that you'd have a large vampire population there. So I think I wanted to play with that idea and maybe go beyond just the main character of my first book, and maybe play with some other characters, but I just haven't gotten there yet because it's only so many hours in the day. But I like to get back to it at some point for sure.
Totally get it. Yeah. All right, let's get into the comics because
Sure.
that's what the show's about.
Yeah.
So which came first? Because that'll give me sort of a frame to talk about it. The actual publisher, your self-publishing outfit of Outtatime Comics, or the actual title Red, White, and Broke, the first comic, I guess, under that
Yeah.
publisher.
So Red, White, and Broke definitely came first. I had the idea for the comic, and it's about a superhero who can't afford to pay his bills because every time he flies off to save the world, he gets fired from his day job, which is of course what would happen in the real world, right? I mean, that's where I like this intersection of real world and fiction. So he launches a Kickstarter campaign to crowdfund being a superhero, right? So I had this idea of a superhero kickstarting his superheroics. And so I wrote the first issue, I got my artist to draw it and everything. I was getting ready to launch the Kickstarter, and I was like, I need like a like a publishing company to kind of put this out under. Like, I feel like just being like Mike Spring Presents doesn't really have that air of legitimacy to it. You know what I mean? And I think I'm a pretty good comic book writer. But if there's one thing I'm really good at, it's selling things. I'm a really good salesman, you know. I've sold things for many years of my life. Now I'm not a seller, but I'm as a my day job, I'm a corporate trainer, so I'm talking all the time and I got to win people over. And so like I'm really good at selling and marketing and things like that. And so I knew that just being like, hey, some guy in his basement has comics just doesn't like get people's attention. So I wanted to have kind of a publishing kind of company, you know, and then I'm also always like lofty ideals, like maybe at some point I can bring other people into it, you know, so on and so forth. And boy, I was coming up with the hardest time coming up with a name. I just couldn't think of anything. And I was like days away from launching my Kickstarter. And I said to my wife, I was like, I am running out of time to come up with a name for a comic book company. And she was like, why don't you just use that, Outtatime Comics? And I was like, perfect. I love Back to the Future, and there's the tie in there. Plus, I procrastinate a lot. And so I'm always running out of time. So Outtatime Comics was born, and that is sort of and now you know, while it is still largely my kind of self-publishing arm, I do like that it is now the home for all three of my projects that I've done so far: Red, White, and Broke, Uncaped, and the 8-Bit Slasher, which is my new book. So at least I like that they're all under the same umbrella. So when people come to our table at conventions, it's kind of like it's a little bit less random than just having different comics. It's all like they all have that Outtatime logo on it. And I think what that stands for, if you see on my banner here, right, our slogan is where fun comes first. And that's because like there's a million comics out there that are grim and gritty and dark, and that's great. I love those. I read those also. But I like to have fun, and I like to read fun comics. I like comics that make me laugh sometimes or put a smile on my face. And that's how I write. Like I don't think I'm capable of writing like a really dark, serious comic with no humor in it. It's just not the way I operate. So I feel like Outtatime, when you see that logo, you know like, hey, you know what? This may not be a masterpiece, I don't know, but at least I'll have a good time reading it. It'll put a smile on my face, you know, I'll enjoy it. And when I put it down and I'm finished with it, I'll feel like, hey, that was fun. I enjoyed that. And that's what I'm trying to bring into comics, you know, is that sense of fun that I think sometimes can be missing a little bit these days, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a good mission statement for, you know, your comic publishing thing. And not only, and it gives you some sort of branding,
Mhm.
right? So that if you ever wanted to create sort of a cohesive out of time universe,
Right,
or
right.
maybe it is already, then that's an opportunity. And then, you know, by not using your name, you also leave open the opportunity, hey, you know, maybe this thing grows to a point where you're hiring other writers and artists and they could
Yeah.
be under this, you know,
Yeah,
umbrella.
absolutely. Absolutely. Man, I'm not there yet. I don't have the means
Right.
to do that yet, but I have a lot of friends who are comic creators, and like if the right opportunity presented itself and we could figure out a way to make it work, or we just get you know, big enough, that's how a lot of comics companies get started. You know what I mean? Like I'm not opposed to being like, you know, the next, you know, I mean, Dark Horse, Image, whatever, those are big. But you know what I'm saying? Even like an
Yeah.
Ahoy or Mad Cave or some of the kind of bigger, smaller independents, you know, like I'm perfectly happy to take up that space in the comics industry, you know. So yeah, it does give me that sort of umbrella that I can, if the circumstances work out, bring other people in under at some point, which would be great. I think that'd be awesome.
So Red, White, and Broke, which was the initial series, you know, how did was the idea percolating in the back of your mind for a while, or was it something that sort of struck you and like, I got to do this as a comic, I got to do it right now?
It was a little bit of both, actually. I'll be honest with you, because I definitely came across I thought up the idea of a superhero kickstarting being a superhero, right? Like running a Kickstarter to pay for his superheroics. But that was it. I just had that idea, right? And I didn't really know what to do with it for a while. And so I sat on it, I kind of percolated, and my writing process is different from I think a lot of other people's. You know, you hear a lot of writers, they're like, what's your advice for aspiring writers? And they're like, write every day. Yeah, I'm not that guy. Like I'm not going to give people that advice. And maybe I'm not a great writer as a result. I don't know. I think I'm a pretty good writer, but I'm a little biased. But I don't work that way. I think of a new idea like every single day and I write them all down. And then eventually one of those ideas starts to like take over my thoughts, right? And push all the other ideas out. And that's when I know like, okay, that's going to be my next project, right? Because it starts to be, like keep me up at night. And that's what happened with Red, White, and Broke. It was like I started going to bed at night and then like I couldn't sleep because I was like, okay, so then how does he get, okay, so this is why he has to kickstart it. And then, okay, what's going to be his rewards he's going to offer? And then, okay, how do I add some bad guys in? And like I kept thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it until I basically had the story fleshed out. And then I was like, okay, now I'm gonna sit down and write this. You know what I mean? So I'm not the guy who's like just, writing random things every day. I kind of sit on these ideas and form them all in my head. And then when the time comes to write it out, it's pretty much mapped out in my head. It's just a matter of putting it on paper. So I don't know if that's a good process or not. I, but it works for me. And I'll say like, with some level of humility, I get a lot of compliments from people who read the comics and tend to really like them. And to me, the biggest compliment is always people I don't know. Like it's great when your friends are like, "Hey, I really liked your comic," and it's not like their opinion doesn't matter, but like they're your friends, right? But when people at conventions come up to me and are like, they'll buy one of my comics on a Saturday and then come back on Sunday and be like, "I read this last night and I loved it. Let me get your other book." And they're giving you praise and following it up with money, right? Because they're not going to spend that money if they didn't really like it. That to me is like, okay, that's a real compliment, and that says, okay, again, I'm not writing Watchmen here, you know what I mean? But I'm at least writing something that people enjoy, and to me, that's means I'm being successful at what I'm trying to do. So that's kind of my process.
Yeah, I mean, you cross the threshold to professional in some way. I mean, if people are giving you money
Right.
unsolicited
Yep.
for your work, then
Yep.
you're a professional. You're a
Yeah.
comics
Yeah.
professional at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
So uh, I gotta think that you keep talking about the concept behind Red, White, and Broke and the kickstarting your own superhero career.
Yeah.
That was appealing also because as a meta storyline, because I would assume you were going to always do this through Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Was that sort of a thought process like this is kind of the perfect way into a
Yes.
kickstarting comic career?
It absolutely was. I definitely really enjoyed that. Like you said, that meta. I love meta humor and meta like approaches to things. And I love the idea of kickstarting a comic about a superhero kickstarting his superheroics. And I thought that was a really neat parallel. And having been somebody who had, backed many Kickstarters, and I had run one previous Kickstarter for actually a Bloodsucker Blues related project. So I knew a little bit of the ins and outs of the Kickstarter world. And so I thought I could really bring a unique perspective to it. So definitely that I was like, who's not going to love the idea of pledging on a Kickstarter about a superhero running a Kickstarter? I like it just felt like it tied together really nicely. So that was definitely in the back of my mind or in front of my mind even while I was putting it together for sure.
Okay, so there are a lot of writers out there that want to make comics,
Mhm.
and I think they have the same apprehension you do, and probably get into prose first because they're like, I don't know any artists, I don't know how to contact artists. How do I get my sort of comic dreams off the ground? What did you do? How did you find your first artist, and what advice would you give others that are sort of looking into breaking into comics as a writer,
Sure.
but don't have that kind of collaboration set up yet?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So first of all, in terms of how I got started, how I found my artist, I actually used Facebook. A friend of mine turned me on to a Facebook group that's for connecting writers and artists. I spent a couple days going through it and look, artists post their samples and their rates and stuff like that. And I kind of went through and I was looking for, a very tough combination of somebody who I thought was really good and somebody who I thought was affordable. And that's a very small Venn diagram because there's people who can draw excellent and charge way more than I could afford to pay. And there's people who are really cheap who I'll just say need more practice, right? They're just not ready yet to draw a full comic. So I found a couple people that I liked. I reached out to a couple people, talked to a few guys, and my artist who drew Red, White, and Broke, Dennis Torona, he worked out really well in terms of he was in the sweet spot. I really liked his artwork. I liked the samples. He was affordable. We decided to do like a 5-page sample. I loved it. Then he ended up drawing all of Red, White, and Broke, and actually has drawn all of my comics to date. Um, because I think his artwork is just incredible. I love his artwork. I think it's only a matter of time before he gets snatched up by Marvel or DC. So I want to hang on to him as long as I can. And we've developed a really good working relationship. You know, he can read my mind so that I can write very minimal scripts for him, and he always takes what I write down and makes it look better, which is a great collaboration to have. Um, the advice that I would give people who are trying to, who are thinking about making their start into comics is a couple of things. On the one side, I would say just put something out. Some of the experiences I've had, being at conventions is everybody, of course, is working on something, but I've had people come up to me and literally say things like, "Oh, I'm writing a book. I've been working on it for 7 years." Okay, stop. Like, finish it, publish it, and put it out. It probably won't be perfect. It probably won't be the best thing you're ever going to write, but nobody's going to be able to read it if you take 10 years to write something. I've put out, this will be my third graphic novel in 3 years. Am I going to challenge George R.R. Martin for King of the Hill anytime soon? Probably not, but at least I have books that I can sell people. Like, you have to just at a certain point let go of it and say, like, okay, this isn't perfect, but I'm going to make it as good as I can, and then I'm going to let go of it and move on, right? So that's one thing, because I hear that kind of thing a lot from people. Like, "Oh, I've been working on this for 5 years." Well, stop working on it and just get it done. You know what I mean? I don't mean to sound harsh. I hear it constantly. The other thing I would say is just, yeah, utilize those resources. You can find people on social media for every aspect of it. I mean, I found my artist first. Then I had a local friend of mine who does his own comics, did the lettering for my first issue, and then he couldn't do the second issue. So he recommended me a letterer and he recommended me a colorer. And I've been working with them both ever since. And then my colorer actually got snatched up by Dynamite Comics. So he's doing like Vampirella and Red Sonja now. So he did my covers for this book, my new book, but he can't do the interiors. But he recommended his former assistant, who's now doing the colors for the book. So like, once you sort of get involved and you meet people, the ball starts rolling and you get recommendations and friends of friends, and you can say, "Hey, do you know anybody?" And usually somebody does know somebody. And that's how you can kind of build a little bit of a network. So now I've got, different guys that I can go to. And I know that if, like, my letterer, for example, couldn't do my book, I know he could recommend somebody to me, who could. And I've met other people also at conventions. People will come up and give you their cards and be like, "Hey, if you ever need a new letterer or you ever need a new colorist, here's my card." So I keep all those, so kind of like doing the comic sort of attracts the people to you into your orbit, so that it expands your network. And so that's, again, but that doesn't happen unless you're doing it and putting it out there, so that's always the thing I tell people first is you gotta get something done, finish it, put it out there for people, even if it's not your magnum opus, the best thing you've ever done. So that's my advice.
Yeah, I I agree with it. Everybody has to start somewhere, and you're only going to get the ball rolling if the ball exists,
Yeah,
right?
that's exactly it.
Um, and that's great. And comics is at the end of everything, it's a small world.
Yeah,
So, like you said, you start making one or two contacts, it can snowball pretty quickly because those contacts know other contacts, and people know.
yeah.
It's just a network that I think once you start discovering the nodes of that network, you
Mhm.
get connected rather quickly. Uh,
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, and I do a lot of
Go ahead.
conventions too. And so I've made, I'm a social guy, that helps a little bit, but I've made a lot of connections at conventions with other artists and writers. And so, like, I have a whole network of other writers I could reach out to, be like, "Hey, who's coloring your book? Who's lettering your book?" And then I've met a lot of my cover artists, because I usually have a variety of people do my different covers. Most of my cover artists are people I've become friends with through conventions, so that's another nice, networking thing as well, is just like people you table next to, or people that you get talking to at a convention, and suddenly it's like, that's how I got Ryan Gary Brown to do a cover for 8-Bit Slasher. He does covers for, Ninja Turtles and Thundercats and Usagi Yojimbo and, every licensed comic on the planet. And he did a cover for my new book because we've been hanging out at shows for the past, 3 years, and we get along really well. And I was like, "Hey, finally found the right book for your art style. Let's do it. And he was super excited, so that's a fun thing as well.
Yeah. Very cool. So I do want to get to 8-Bit Slasher, but before we
Sure.
do that, there was a book in between your first and this one,
Yep.
and I want to give that its due, which was called Uncaped.
Yes, Uncaped is I have a real soft spot in my heart for Uncaped, I have to admit. It's it is a rom-com, a superhero rom-com, and effectively, and again, you're going to see a trend here. It is about if a Wonder Woman level superhero, like one of the most famous superheroes in the world, fell in love with this completely average guy who is in no way, shape, or form ready to date the world's most famous superhero. She's like a goddess, and he is like, and I know like you have people like, Clark Kent, like super Lois Lane. She's not super powered, but she's like a globe-trotting Pulitzer Prize winning journalist.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Goes into war zones. Like this guy like works at a comic store and plays in a garage band that has like 27 fans. Like he is as average as they come and is not prepared to deal with this world of suddenly being like super famous and dating a super powered, goddess. And so what I really wanted to do was combine my love of superheroes with all of the kind of tropes of a traditional rom-com because I like a good rom-com. So I really wanted to hit all the beats from your traditional movie rom-coms and just partner that with the world of superheroes. And I love that book. I'm really I'm really proud of how it turned out. I think it's got a nice mix of some good superhero action and some good superhero, traditional things, but also a real good dose of romantic comedy to it. And I think there's not a lot of comics that can say that. It's not a genre that I think gets explored a lot in comics. So I'm pretty proud of how that one turned out.
There used to be a whole line, I mean, back in I want to say the 50s probably, of romance comics. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a whole genre that was probably, I don't know if I'm correct in saying this, but may have been outselling the superhero genre, or at least certain superheroes within that genre.
It
Uh,
definitely was back in the 50s. It was like one of their biggest sellers. I mean, there was tons of them. If you look them up, there was just so many of them, young romance and dating all-stars and whatever. I mean, there was tons of them and they sold a lot. They were very like melodramatic, like they were very
yeah,
like romance novels in comic book
right,
form, you know what I
right.
mean? And which is great. Like there's nothing against that. I think Uncaped is a little more a little more humorous for sure. But yeah, there's a rich tradition of romance in comics, but I think in recent years it's kind of taken a back seat. It's just supporting plot lines in a lot of comics nowadays,
Yeah,
which is fine. I like my superhero comics. I love superhero comics, but I'm always like when I read Superman, it's the interactions with Clark and Lois that are my favorite parts. You know what I
right.
mean? And you don't get as much of that. So I was like, well, then I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, yeah.
If I'm not
Well,
seeing.
I think it's a great way of, you know, bridging that divide, right, between what people think comics are, which are superheroes,
Yep.
and what they can be, which is all these different genres. So, exploring those corners of the superhero universe by taking something people are familiar with in comics and then sort of exploring something else on the side while using that, I think is a really good tool.
Yeah, I like to think so. I mean, that's been my MO so far, and it's worked out pretty well for me. So I'm gonna keep doing it.
So, question for that, and then as we get into 8-Bit Slasher, are these both ideas from your, notebook that just started keep popping into your head, and you're like, okay, I think it's time for this one?
Yeah, I have this sort of bad habit of like right as I'm starting to get finished with one book, but not quite finished with it, I have an idea for my next book. So, like in Red, White, and Broke, which I did as a 4-issue miniseries, Lady Olympus, who's the main character of Uncaped, makes a one-panel cameo appearance, and she just sort of started off as like I had a little panel with like a group of superheroes, and I kind of created her for that. And while I was kind of thinking of ideas for characters, I thought of hers, and then I got the idea of her dating this guy. And then like so then I was doing Uncaped and like the script was done. I was late waiting for the last, 6, 8 pages to come in. And while I'm waiting for those, the idea for 8-Bit Slasher popped into my head. And now 8-Bit Slasher is pretty much done. But then a few weeks ago, I had an idea for it I think might be my next book. And it's like, I don't know why it always seems to be right when I'm nearing. I guess because like there's nothing left for me to do at this point. Like 8-Bit Slasher, the script is done. The artwork is pretty much done at this point. So it's like now it's just kickstarting and waiting and then sending it off to the color and the letterer. So I'm sort of just twiddling my thumbs. So the ideas start coming, you know what I mean? But yeah, so that's how Uncaped came about was it was in my kind of notebook of ideas, but that was the one again that just sort of once I had the idea for it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So it was like, okay, well, that's going to be next, you know. So that's kind of that's how it came about.
Great. Well, tell us about 8-Bit Slasher, which is your current kickstarting comic, which is looks like it veers to yet another different genre.
Yeah, I do like to switch it up a little bit. You know, I did two superhero books in the first one, even though one's a rom-com and one's not. But I did want to try something a little bit different this time, just that I'm not, retreading the same waters. So 8-Bit Slasher is a it's a horror comedy, if you will. But horror is it's not like a gothic horror or anything like that. It's like a slasher film video games mashup. Basically, what it is there's this, very classic slasher character named Eddie Mayhem. He was, popular in the 80s and 90s in a bunch of movies, and now he appears in a video game as like a DLC character. But through some machinations, he gets sucked into the real world and comes to life. And of course, goes on a killing spree, as slashers will do. But he brings the video game world into the real world with him. So as our group of teenagers goes on the run, they start to encounter more and more things from the video game world that are sort of seeping into the real world, henchman battles and boss fights and, like power ups and things like that. So to me, I really wanted to take two things that I love, which is like classic video games, like arcade games, from when I was younger, and slasher movies, which I'm a huge fan of, and put marry them together, for something a little bit unique. So I thought if you can't get excited by video games and slasher films, with comedy, then I have nothing left for you. You know what I mean? Like then I don't know what I'm gonna write that you're gonna enjoy.
I mean, my late 80s nostalgia meter is like,
Right.
off the
Right.
charts right now.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And that's what I tried to play with, is that idea. I mean, I think you'll see a lot of things in it. It's very, again, very classic slasher, a lot of throwbacks to things like Mortal Kombat and like the old X-Men and Ninja Turtles arcade games and stuff like
mhm,
that. So yeah, definitely some nostalgia, but I think also something but fresh enough that, people who maybe are younger will also not younger like kids, but like, younger generation
sure.
can still appreciate and enjoy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, throw in some Angry Birds in
Yeah.
there, which is already passe and nostalgia itself. But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, I'll do that for the sequel.
yeah, yeah. I got to get some new, more current references.
Right.
So that's great. So this is your third Kickstarter, right?
Yeah. Well, sort of. Technically, I did Red, White, and Broke as 4 issues. So I ran
Okay.
on a trade paperback. I ran 4 campaigns for that. But now what I've done with Uncaped and 8-Bit Slasher, I'm not the guy to do single issue multiple stories. Like I don't have the attention span for it. So I've moved into now doing my books as 48-page square bound graphic novels. So it's a complete story start to finish. It comes in a nice square book, like if you think back to all your old, like back in the 80s 90s, like those you get them for like 3.99, but they're like that prestige format, like
Yeah,
your
yeah.
worlds, your one shots, your classic one shots. It's not stapled, it's got that nice square binding on it, nice thick covers and all that stuff, but it is a complete story. So I ran a separate one campaign for Uncaped and now a campaign for 8-Bit Slasher, but you get the whole book like when you buy it. There's no continued to be continued, no cliffhanger or anything like that. um I mean, I plans for sequels, but you don't have to like buy this and then get halfway through and it ends and you're like, well, what happened? And you have to wait 6 months, a year for the next issue to come out. So this is technically my sixth graphic novel or comic book Kickstarter campaign. Third title. So sorry, that was a complicated answer to a simple question. I apologize.
No, that's fine. And you gave an answer to my follow-up question, which is, what have you learned now that you're a Kickstarter veteran and Kickstarter veteran? I think I said Kickstarter veteran, and what do you think about what are the pros and cons of the platform?
Sure. I mean, so yeah, one of the things I've learned is definitely I've learned a lot, honestly, from doing something. I learned something with every campaign that I do, to the point where I think I've got it, down pretty well right now. Like I know what's going to work generally and what's not. But I did learn that like the amount of patience you need to put out like a 4 issue miniseries, it took me over a year to finish it, and that's still a pretty fast pace. It was about 4 months between each issue, which for Kickstarter is quite fast. But I just, it was like, I just want to finish it, get the trade paperback out, I start a new book, and it was like, but I can't start a new book till I finish this one. So that was one big thing I learned was do them as graphic novels, right? As opposed
Right.
to floppy issues. Um, what I think about the platform is, honestly, I think it's great. I'm a big fan of Kickstarter. I sometimes I'll have people like friends who'll be like, "Can I just give you the money instead?" So that Kickstarter doesn't, take its cut. And I'm like, "No, no, no, no. I need you to go through Kickstarter because I have to hit that goal to get the money." Um, and that is one of their rules, and there's pros and cons to that, but I accept it. But here's the thing: like I have all my books available on my website, um, which is just outoftimecomics.com, and I've probably sold like a half dozen comics off the website because it's just there's nothing to drive people to it. I don't spend money to advertise it. When I'm selling at conventions, people buy the books from me at conventions. Like I'll tell them about if they're like, "Do you have a website I can order them?" Because they're not buying today. I'm like, "Sure, it's here." And no one ever goes to it. Like that's just the nature of comic conventions. You know what I mean? I can't get the audience that Kickstarter has on my own. You know what I mean? I could
Mhm.
tell every person on the planet to go to outoftimecomics.com and buy books from me, and they're never going to in the numbers I can get from Kickstarter. They have the platform and they have the audience and they have the comics on Kickstarter is kind of a culture. There are people on Kickstarter who are fans of supporting books on Kickstarter and will pay $20 for a book that in a comic store would cost you $5 or $6, but they want to be part of the creation of it and they want to get that special cover and they want those stretch goal things, the magnets and the bookmarks and the goodies that you get and the signed copies and all that. And they're willing to spend that money to do that, and you can't find that other places. Like I go to conventions and I'm a good salesman at conventions. I'm saying that I'll brag for a minute. If I can get you to my table, there's a really good chance I can get you to buy a book. Okay. And even then it's hard to get people sometimes to buy more than one book or buy, like I've read White and Broken Uncaped. Like there's a deal if you buy them both. And people will be like, well, I'll just get the one. And then you go on Kickstarter, people are like all 5 covers of 8-Bit Slasher. Sure, click. You know what I mean? Like there's a different mindset for consumers on Kickstarter, and it's hard to find that anywhere else. You know what I mean? So for me, I'll take the platform any day of the week because I just can't get that size audience any other way. So they can have their percentage, you know what I mean? Because it delivers an audience to me, and I feel like that percentage goes to paying for that audience to come to my door. So I can't complain about it.
You're the first person to really articulate that, and you tapped into something that I think I, as a consumer on Kickstarter,
Hmm.
am privy to, which is sort of this almost community and the way of buying because you feel empowered
Yep.
that you're supporting somebody
Mhm.
and their creative vision, that
Yep.
you do, your price point, your mental price point is a lot higher.
Yep.
And you do things, or you get into the higher levels a lot easier than you would be in different situations. And
Yep.
and that's really interesting that you're able to pinpoint that and articulate, because I find myself doing the same thing. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll get the signed book plate and also the last issues that I missed from Kicks,
Uh-huh.
and just get everything.
Yep.
Yeah, why not?
Yep.
So that is a really advantageous part, I think, of Kickstarter, especially for creators. If you're able to tap into that, which I think, it's a good way of, for others that are thinking about this, that is why you do Kickstarter.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So before we wrap up, I, wanted to get into a few other things that I saw on your biography in terms
Sure.
of what you do, which is, I saw that you have done, or maybe are still doing, voice acting and audiobook narration. How did
Yeah.
you get into that?
So I like when I was a kid, I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and there's a decent enough film scene down in Orlando. Like, movies are shot there. They've got the Hollywood, the Universal Studios and Disney Studios that have like backlots and stuff. So you'd have movies and things like that, TV shows being shot down there. So as a kid, I got into acting and I did like commercials and random acting jobs. And one of the things I did was a couple of voiceover spots that I auditioned for and got them for like Levi's jeans and Sears and stuff like that. And then I kind of got out of acting for a while. But then when I moved up to New York, and I ran across a friend of a friend who owned a voiceover training company who trained people to become professional voice actors. And so I started working for them, and started producing voiceovers and teaching people voiceovers because I had some experience in that realm. And through that, I got, a lot of opportunities to start doing voiceover work myself again. And so I narrated about a dozen audiobooks in that time. Nothing super famous that you would have heard of, mostly, independent stuff. But I do still do a lot of voice acting on the side. It's I I I sadly never have quite enough time to do what I would need to do to make it like a full-time job. But I do every so often I get a gig come across my desk, and it's a nice little extra side thing that I'm I've done so much voiceover work at this point that it's really um, you know I don't want to say it's easy for me because it is work, but it's fairly easy. I know how to do it at this point. So if a job comes across my desk, like, and someone's going to pay me to do it, I'll jump right on it. I don't do the audiobooks as much anymore. You have to hunt those down a lot more, and they're very, very time consuming. But I do a lot of I do the boring stuff really well. Is actually what it is, sort of my bread and butter. So like if you've got like a 6 hour PowerPoint presentation on how to use a software system at your company, like I'm the guy for that. That's what people come to me for. I did like a 9 hour project last year for the Department of Transportation, all about statutes and regulations and stuff. And it's like, if you look up regulation 37.2, you'll find that the statute says blah blah blah. I do that, a lot of that stuff, because I can make it sound relatively interesting without people falling asleep. It's not glamorous, but it's a nice side gig, and I enjoy doing it. So yeah, so I still do that. It's not my main thing, but I do it when I can. I like it.
You ever have the temptation to introduce like character voices into different parts of
You know, I
presentations?
I honestly wish I could. I don't. I'm not a guy who can do character voices. Like some people can just do that. They can do impressions and stuff like that. I'm not one of those guys. Like that is not a skill that I have. Like if you like my voice and how I talk, we're golden. If you want to do anything other than that,
Yeah.
I just don't have that skill. Like it is definitely a skill, and I do not possess it. I can't do accents very well. I can't do character voices very well. It's bad. So yeah, that's why I end up with a lot of this informative stuff where they just want a clear speaker, you
Sure.
know, to say, now turn to page 1 of your instruction manual. On it, you're going to find blah blah blah. Like that's me. I'm good.
Yeah, yeah, everybody has their niche,
Yeah, yeah,
so
that is
you
it for
got
me.
yours. I
Exactly.
am similarly amazed though by some of the audiobook readers
Oh,
that are able to do
yeah.
hundreds of like distinct voices. Like my daughter and I are listening to the Harry Potter books on
Oh, they're
tape,
amazing.
and the person that does it, I'm just amazed at how many distinct voices they can do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yeah,
wish I
it's an
wish I had
interesting.
that skill. Believe me, I really do. I would love to be able to do that, but it's just my vocal cords do not work that way.
Neither do mine.
Sadly.
Um, And another thing you do is some of what we're doing, which is a little bit of podcasting. We were talking about before recording. Tell the folks out here about after the ending, what it is, and what you guys have talked about.
Sure, yeah. After the ending is a movie podcast. My co-host Phil Edwards and I, what we do is we try to figure out what happens after the ending of your favorite movies, right? So every week we take a movie or two that doesn't have a sequel, or the last movie in a franchise, and kind of figure out what happened to the characters after it ended. It started as an exercise in, again, where the real world meets fiction. I was watching the remake of Poltergeist in 2015, and minor spoilers, but in the movie, it's this couple, and they consistently complaining about not having enough money to pay their bills. And at the end of the movie, they move out of their house because of ghosts. And it's like, and I got to thinking, I was like, okay, but you have no money. You just moved out of your house because of ghosts. I'm pretty sure you can't claim that on your insurance. Like, you can't be like, I need to pay off my house with insurance money because ghosts. You know what I mean? Like that. Like
Right.
so. I'm like, where are they going now? Like that's great. They survived the ghost, but now what? And that was the genesis of it. I was like, oh, I gotta explore this more. So I turned it into a podcast. And so that's what we do every week, is we kind of take a movie like that. And so it started off sort of as like, well, if this was the real world, how would things go? But then you start doing movies that are not in the real world anymore, and then they just then all the rules are out the window. So then our endings just became whatever the heck we decided we wanted them to be. So sometimes they're very grounded in reality, and sometimes it's like, oh, well, the kid from It falls into a time warp and, meets Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then they go into space. And you're like, it just sort of depends on what mood we're in, for that. So we've been doing that for several years now, since probably 2016, I want to say. 2017, something like that. And we've got over 250 episodes, and now we record about once a month or so. We were weekly for a long time, but now we've kind of gotten into about a once a month groove, and that seems to work pretty well.
Any favorite episodes that we can point folks to where you really think you guys came up with some sterling continuations or
Yeah, let me think. There's an early episode. I think it's episode 8. We did a couple baseball movies, and that was the one I always point to people where like we finally got it. Like the first, like,
Mhm.
don't start with episode 1. We're a little rough. Right on episode 8 or 9, when we're doing it's like their baseball episode, and it was like that's where it started to be like, oh yeah, okay, this feels good. Like this feels right. So that's one. But I think also, I want to say. So our 200th episode or maybe our 150th episode, we tried to pick like 2 movies that you couldn't do an after the ending for because of the way they ended. I think we did Thelma and Louise and this movie Melancholia, which starts off with the world exploding basically. And
Watched
so
it.
yeah, it wasn't great. But so that was kind of a fun one to sort of be like, how do you do follow-ups to movies where the ending is clearly not conducive to having a follow-up.
Yeah,
I think for one of our episodes, probably a milestone episode 100, 150, something like that, we did like Aliens and Predator, where we like just disavowed the sequels and just went with, okay, the characters from Aliens, the characters from Predator, like Schwarzenegger, like what happened? Because, you got all the other sequels that sort of dilute the franchise a little bit. We
sure.
wanted to know what happens with these characters. So those are some ones that I think kind of stand out as some of my favorites.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll put the links in the show notes.
appreciate that.
So I don't know how much you can say. I know you said that you are working or something popped into your head now that now that 8-Bit Slasher is sort of on its way to completion. What are you working on? I don't know if you can say exactly what that
Yeah,
one
I
is,
can give a
but
rough
you may have other projects as well. So let us know what's going on currently and what we can look for in the near future.
Sure. I think one of the things I'm toying with right now is a sequel to Uncaped. It was definitely my most successful Kickstarter so far. And I have a really good idea for where I want to go with the sequel, where I'm going to tackle another genre of comedy and again sort of bring all those kind of tropes and truisms into the superhero world. So I'm excited about that. But the other thing the new idea that popped into my head, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I will say it's a science fiction conspiracy thriller. So kind of like the great 70s conspiracy thrillers like 3 Days of the Condor, Parallax View, The Conversation, stuff like that, but with a science fiction setting. So that's kind of the new idea that popped into my head a couple weeks ago while I was wrapping up 8-Bit Slasher. And that's so I'm sort of torn on which one I'm going to work on next. I guess it'll kind of depend on how 8-Bit Slasher goes funding wise. If it goes really well and I have a little more freedom with my next book, I'll probably do the sci-fi book. If it just kind of scrapes to the goal, I might return to Uncaped just to kind of get that injection of like, hey, this sold really well the first time. Maybe go with a sure thing for my next Kickstarter. Do have to, I'm a little bit of a slave to where the money takes me because without the funding, I can't afford to print the books. So I want to be able to be free to create what I want to create, but I also want to make sure that I have the money to put the books out, or else I'm not creating anything. So if something's going to sell really, really well, then I feel like, and I have a good idea. I'm not going to write it just to, sell books if it don't have a good idea. But since I do have a good idea for Uncaped's sequel, it could be either one of those two things. But the sci-fi book I think is going to come, you know, if not very in the next thing, it'll come after I do the Uncaped follow-up.
All right, folks, what did you think about that interview? I love talking to Mike. He's an easygoing dude. Love how he's gotten into comics and pulled himself up and others up by the bootstraps, and has really kicked off this new world with Outtatime Comics. And I just wish him, all the best and all the success in the world. Please go back 8-Bit Slasher. It really helps these independent creators get their work out there. I think Mike has a really good head on his shoulders in terms of bringing fun stories into the world. And again, just we love to support these guys. So go out there and support Mike and 8-Bit Slasher, which is on Kickstarter now. But that'll do it for this episode and this week of episodes on the Dollar Bin Bandits. Thank you so much for viewing. Thank you for listening. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, and we'll see you next issue.